All right, so today we're going to do the second half of our doctrine dimension. We had to cut or divide this dimension up into two because we're going to go over in this dimension two of the largest or most complex doctrines that have to do with Buddhism. So last time we talked about all the things that you see on the screen now, right? That it's a non-theistic religion, the doctrine of Anatman or Anatta, and that within Buddhism we seek the truth within ourselves. We don't rely on any source of external authority. So the second thing that we're going to talk about for doctrine are what are called the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. And the Four Noble Truths are sort of, in one sense, it is what the Buddha discovered, or what Siddhartha Gautama discovered when he became the Buddha. So the realization or the discovery of the Four Noble Truths are what caused him to become enlightened. So to reach enlightenment in Buddhism, to reach nirvana, you understand and live according to the Four Noble Truths. You have achieved what the Four Noble Truths are attempting to teach the individual. And these are, in another sense, so we could say because of that, they're really the core doctrines, the core understanding of life according to Buddhism. And it has to do with the nature of suffering and how to overcome suffering. So remember when Siddhartha Gautama left his kingdom, when he ran away from home, he was attempting to do just this, right? He wanted to find out why it is that we suffer and how we can overcome that suffering. Remember, he was so shocked by the fact that we all grow old, we get sick, and we die, that so much suffering awaits us. How is it possible for us to find joy in this life? How can we overcome that suffering? So the Four Noble Truths are our path to understanding the nature, cause of suffering, and how to overcome it. So the first noble truth is that life is suffering. And the word that I have here, dukkha, is the Pali word. So this is the original word from this noble truth that is usually translated as suffering. So we could also say the first noble truth is life is dukkha. But usually it is translated as suffering. But we're going to talk about how that's not really the best translation, or we need more translations in order to fully understand this first truth. So life is suffering. And this probably sounds pretty depressing, right? That the first truth of Buddhism, the first thing that we have to understand about life is that it's filled with suffering. And in one sense, this is very similar and should sound very similar from what we talked about in Hinduism, right? That in Hinduism, we don't want to stay in samsara because ultimately every human life is marked by more suffering than joy because of these sufferings that await us all, right? That Siddhartha Gautama discovered. That no matter how happy we are, no matter how much money we have, no matter how much love we have in our life, no matter what, we will still get old, we will get sick, and we will die. And we have to not just experience that for ourselves, we have to watch everyone in our life go through those same things. And that's definitely something that is full of suffering, that is not fun to experience in every single lifetime in samsara. But Buddhism, in a sense, goes even beyond that and says that those are not the only sources of suffering in our lives. There is a spectrum of suffering. There are different gradients to suffering. And so that's one of the reasons, or that's the reason why some people say that suffering is not the best translation of dukkha, because it sounds too intense. It sounds more like the episodes of suffering that are, the sadness, the tragedy, the aging, the death, the sickness. And really, Buddhism is pointing to something even more fundamental about our lives. And that is that we could also translate this sentence to be, life is unsatisfying, or life is unsatisfactory. So it's not just the level of suffering that's the tragedies and the sorrows and the unhappy times in our lives. It's also that ultimately everything in life is a little bit unsatisfying. Life never quite lives up to our expectations. It's never quite as good as we thought it was going to be, or never quite as good as we remembered it being. And the evidence for this, right, because Buddhism tells us again and again, don't just accept this truth because it's what the Buddha taught or it's what Buddhism teaches. That we can see the truth of this noble truth because of what our minds do and where our minds rest. So the Buddha teaches, if you really pay attention to your thoughts, and this is really what meditation is all about, right? If you really pay attention to your thoughts and think about what it is that you think about, it is very infrequently that our minds actually rest and are satisfied in the present moment. Usually, when we are thinking all the time, right? Usually we are either looking forward to something in the future or we are remembering something in the past, right? We are thinking, oh, things are going to be better when this happens in the future. Or, things were a little bit better at this point in the past. And this could be long periods of time, right? Things will be better when I get my degree. Things will be better when I get a job. Things will be better when I make more money. Or they could be, times far away in the past. I was happier as a child. I was happier when my family lived in this other town, something like that. But even moment to moment, this is true, right? That there are very few times in our lives when we are fully absorbed and satisfied by the present moment, right? You guys are watching this video right now. You may be sitting in your room. You may be in your, I don't know, hopefully you're not in your car. But you're listening to this video right now. And most likely, you are thinking about what you're going to do when you're done watching this video, right? Well, okay, how many more minutes are left? And then after this, I'm going to, watch TV, or I'm going to, I have to go to work, or I have to go do this thing. So most of you are probably looking forward to something happening in the future, right? Something that you get to do when this video is over. Or you might be thinking back to what you were doing before starting your work for your class, right? When I wish I could have slept in later this morning. I wish I could have kept, going on that walk this morning, or, exercising, whatever it is that you were doing earlier in the day that you enjoy doing. Right? So very few of you, and some of you are, I'm sure, but probably very few of you in this moment right now are thinking, wow, this is amazing, right? I get to sit at home, or I get to, sit in the convenience of wherever I am right now and take a class about the religions of the world, right? In the convenience of wherever it's best for me, I am learning about Buddhism. You're probably not fully absorbed by that moment. Some of you maybe are, and that's wonderful. But for the most part, if you pay attention to your thoughts throughout the day, and you can try doing this for the rest of the day, most of the time, you are going to be thinking about something in the future or thinking about something in the past, right? Things will be better when, or things were better when. But the sad part about that is that when we get to that point in the future, it's not like then we will be so fully absorbed in the present moment, right? If you're thinking, well, I can't wait until I'm done with my schoolwork right now. I can watch this video and maybe I'm going to, do some reading. And then tonight I get to hang out with my friends, right? It's not like even at that point when you're hanging out with your friends that you will be fully absorbed then. Wow, this is amazing. I get to spend time with my friends. I finished all my work for today, and this is amazing. Most likely, you're going to be thinking about what you have to do the next day, or that you're tired and you can't wait to go home and go to bed. So no matter what, we are always either putting off our happiness till a future point, or we are convincing ourselves that we were happier before. But again, also most likely at that time that we're thinking, wow, that was amazing. That time was great. It's not like in that moment either that we were truly appreciative of that moment, right? And we do this throughout our entire lives. So the idea of the First Noble Truth is that life never quite lives up to our expectations. We are always convincing ourselves that it will, either at some point in the future or it did at some point in the past. But when we get to that point, or when we were in that point, it still wasn't fully satisfying, right? It was still a little bit less than what we wanted it to be. So we end up simply accepting that life is always a little unsatisfying because we convince ourselves that we will be happier at some other point, right? I will be happy when I finish my college degree. I will be happy when I get the job that I want. I will be happy when I make more money. I will be happy when I fall in love. I will be happy when I have children. And we just kind of keep kicking the can down the road instead of simply accepting, right? And the First Noble Truth teaches us that we have to start by accepting that life is always a little unsatisfying, no matter what point in our life it is. And we see that evidence by where our mind chooses to rest. That there are really only very few moments in our lives that we are fully absorbed by the present moment. That what is happening around us is so amazing and so joyful that our minds stay right there. Our minds are stuck right there. Right? We do have those experiences. It's not to say that those experiences don't exist, but they are so few and far between that they are very memorable. Right? When you sat in front of the sunset and watched the sun go down, when you had a first kiss with your significant other, when you the birth of a child, all of these sort of amazing moments in our lives, we are tied to that moment. We are tied to that present moment. But those are the exceptions. They're not the rule. They're not the norm in our lives. So life is suffering teaches us that life is always a little bit unsatisfying. And that may sound, again, pessimistic or cynical, but Buddhism, as we'll see, teaches that if you start with that acceptance, that is how you can create a life of joy. But first you have to accept that, and that'll make more sense in a minute. So that's the first noble truth. The second noble truth actually teaches us that life is not inherently unsatisfying. We actually cause our suffering. We make our lifetime full of suffering. It's not that life itself is bad. It's not that life itself is sad. But we fill our lives with this suffering, and it's caused by attachment. So the second noble truth you can see here, suffering is caused by attachment. And the Pali word for attachment is tanha. So tanha is the word that is usually translated as attachment. And this noble truth is very strongly tied to another important doctrine or idea in Buddhism, which is that everything in life is impermanent. Everything in life changes. There is nothing stable. There is nothing that stays the same forever. So this is how our attachment causes our suffering. So the nature of the world, the nature of existence, is that everything changes. And as we'll see, or you might be able to guess already, this is very closely connected to the doctrine of Enlightenment, right? We know that nothing ever stays the same. We don't stay the same. Our lives don't stay the same. People in our lives don't stay the same. Situations in our lives don't stay the same. Everything is changing, right? Nothing is going to stay the same forever. But what happens is we live as if that's not true. We delude ourselves into thinking that there are stable and permanent things in life. And we become attached to those. Another translation for tanha is often clinging, like to cling to things. So what happens is we go through life, and when something gives us joy, when something brings happiness to us, we become attached to it. We cling to it. And then when it changes, and it inevitably will, because nothing in life ever stays the same, we are sad. We get sad because of that. So our suffering it's not our destiny. It's not something that has to be. We cause our own suffering because of our attachments and our expectations, right? These expectations that we have of when things will be better, then we become attached to those things, and when everything changes, which it always does, we become sad, right? So, an example of this, you could say, you could point to many, many examples, but, right, you could say, a classic example is becoming attached to an individual, right? People come into our lives that make us very happy. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be a significant other. And that person and that relationship gives us joy. It makes us happy. So we become attached to them, right? We become attached to that relationship exactly the way it is. But do we always remain the same? Are we the same people throughout our entire lives? No, of course not. People grow and they change, and also people come into our lives and they go out of our lives. So we become attached to that person and that relationship that we have exactly the way it is. Then when that person leaves our lives or when that person changes, as inevitably happens, we become sad, right? Oh, that's bad for me. Now I suffer. I had that attachment and now that situation is gone, so I suffer. So we are the authors of our own suffering. We create our lives, which are full of suffering. So this leads into our third noble truth, which basically says that you can end your attachment. So you must end attachment to end suffering. So we can see we kind of start out in a very, what might seem negative or cynical position, but the goal of the Four Noble Truths is actually to say that it is possible to live a life full of joy. It is possible to live a life free of suffering. And to do that, we simply have to end our attachment. I shouldn't say simply because it's not a simple thing. But this is the goal of Buddhism. Someone who has become enlightened goes through his or her own life not becoming attached to anything or anyone because they have learned to accept the doctrine of impermanence, that everything in the world is impermanent. Nothing is stable, nothing is eternal, nothing lasts forever, at least in its same form, right? Everything is constantly changing. So an enlightened being lives with no expectations, right? That I know that everything good that comes into my life, I should enjoy it while it's there, but it's not going to last forever. And if I accept that and I know that from the beginning, I don't have to suffer when that changes, right? I don't have to suffer when that good thing leaves my life. Because I say, of course. Well, of course that was going to happen. I always knew that was going to happen. And in the same sense, when something bad happens in our lives, when something negative occurs, if we can also keep in mind, well, this won't last forever, things will change, then I don't have to suffer just because something negative is happening in my life, something tragic is happening right then. And this may sound very ideal and very hard to achieve, and the idea is that it is, right? This is hard to achieve. This is only what an enlightened person is able to do. Buddhists are constantly striving to end their attachments. They are striving through meditation, through compassion, through all Buddhist practices to go through life without becoming attached to other things. And I said this, we're going to practice meditation, but this is the goal of meditation, right? Is that as we go through life, we can watch our minds. We can pay attention to what we're thinking, and we can see when we are becoming attached to something, right? We can see when we are clinging to something, and we can say, no, I'm not going to do that, right? I need to keep in mind that even this wonderful thing will not be in my life forever, right? Even this terrible thing, it won't last forever, so I don't need to get too upset about it, right? So it's watching our minds, it's watching our thought processes to retrain ourselves to not become attached to things. And I always tell the story. I took a class on Buddhism in college, and the teacher used the example of a relationship, right, which I used previously. Said that imagine you're going out with someone, or you're married to someone, you're in a serious relationship with someone, and that person comes to you one day and they say, baby, I met someone new. I met someone else, and they make me happier. They make me happier than you do. We might automatically, sort of our gut reaction might be, anger, betrayal, frustration. How dare you do this to me, right? You are supposed to be with me. We're in this relationship together. You have done this horrible thing by betraying me with another individual. That's our gut response, right? That's our gut reaction, is to do that. But an enlightened being, if you are someone who can go through your life without attachment, how should you respond? what is the best or the proper response to this? And hopefully you're thinking that the proper response for this is not just acceptance, right? Is not just, okay, well, I can accept that this is happening. It's actually joy, right? Because this person that you love, and if you love an individual without attachment, right, that means that you love them for who they are. You love them separately from the relationship that the two of you have. I love you for you, right? I love the human being. I love the person that you are. And if you really love someone without attachment, you should want that person to be joyful, right? You should actually be excited at this news. Oh my gosh, you found someone that brings you more joy? You found someone that makes you even happier than I do? That's wonderful, right? Let's get you packed up. Let's get you moved out. Let's get you to that person. And again, that might sound idealistic, but this is the goal. This is the goal of achieving enlightenment. It's not an easy goal. It takes a lot of hard work to get there. But this is what Buddhists are aiming to do. This is what they are trying to do, right? To go through life without attachment, Buddhists say, means it's a life of pure joy, right? And it's a stronger love. It's a more pure form of love because you love an individual without attachment, right? You love that person for who they are. I love you as a human being. I'm not just loving the relationship that we have, right? Because that is something that is good for me. That is in some ways a selfish type of love, right? I love you, but I also love the relationship that we have because it brings me joy. It makes me happy, right? This is, you could think of this in terms of the love between parents and children, right? Parents love their children, of course, but they also love, they naturally love the relationship that they have with their children. So some of you may have, started thinking about moving away from home or may have discussed this topic with your parents, and your parents, oh, you want to move away? No, I don't want you to move away, right? They love you, but they want you to stay close. But they know in their heart of hearts that loving you means wanting the best for you. And the best for you may be to move somewhere else. The best for you may be to go somewhere else. So this is something that all people strive to do, but it's not easy, right? To actually say, I love you so much that I'm willing to sacrifice the relationship that we have because maybe you will be happier in a different situation. So we can end our attachment. That's the positive message of the third noble truth. There are practices that we can go through as we move on the Buddhist path. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to go through our lives without clinging to anything, without becoming attached to anything. And then as things come and go in our lifetime, good times, bad times, good people, people leaving our life, then it doesn't affect our mood, right? It doesn't have to bring us down. It doesn't have to cause us suffering. Okay, then the last noble truth is how we do this. It's how we end our attachment. And it's through the Noble Eightfold Path. So we'll talk about specifically what the path is when we get to ethics, because this is basically the Buddha's prescription for how to overcome our attachment, how to live our lives, right? How to orient our lives and our actions towards overcoming our attachment. So by progressing on this path, that's how we work to overcome our attachments. But it's not easy, right? And it's not something that you can necessarily do in one lifetime. It is something, as with Hinduism and moksha, that takes many, many lifetimes to do. This is a very high goal, right? To go through life being just as happy when, something comes into our life as when something leaves our life. It's very hard because our natural inclination is to become attached, is to cling to the good things in our lives, and then to suffer when they leave. So we'll talk more about this when we get to our dimension of ethics. Okay, so that's it for this slide, and then we have one more doctrine slide to go through for this week.